How many of you over the past week saw a story or maybe heard a news story? And it says, according to a study, workers willing to take 20% pay cut for better work-life balance. Joining us now is a workplace expert, Joel Patterson. Thank you for coming on to WORD.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Well, it's a cold Monday morning. I think a lot of people are thinking to themselves, well, I got to work. I'm not a federal worker. I got to go in. I got to do my job today. And they're thinking about drudging in the bitterly cold temperatures. And they're thinking, I want this to be better. They want to find ways to be better. And they say, you know what? I would be willing to take a pay cut if I didn't have to deal with this all the time. Can you kind of explain what the modern day worker is going through today when they're thinking about how much they dislike their job so much that they would take a pay cut to make things better?
Yeah, well, you talk about the weather too and being a cold morning. It's 9 degrees in Dallas right now, so I have no interest in heading into work, as a lot of people do, because that's not very enjoyable. And that kind of comes down to what I think a lot of people are stepping back and looking at their career and deciding, hey, what do I really want out of this, and how much do I want it to impact my personal life? And as we get younger and younger in our working environments, as far as people's age, I think that's becoming more and more of an issue. You look at Gen Z, you look at millennials, and they're much more willing to step up and say, you know what, I actually don't want to work 60 hours this week. There might be pressure to do that, but I don't want to, and they're making that choice. Now, you can think what you want about that choice, but the reality is that work-life balance is something that everybody talks about, everybody thinks about on some level, whether they communicate it or not. And personally, I kind of don't like the term work-life balance because it makes it seem like one is good and the other is bad. And what I think people need to really kind of, at least when it comes to work, they need to step back and say, it's not necessarily going to be work versus life. It's finding ways to integrate them a little bit so that the stress of work isn't creating issues in my life and vice versa. But the reality is, it's going to, right? I mean, things happen in life, and you got to have the skills to be able to balance the two. But it doesn't really change anything because people are looking at it like, you know what? I've gone through a pandemic. I've gone through a really difficult labor environment, and I don't care about those things anymore. I just want to be happy, and they're willing to do something about it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing to all of this. And we saw just how much inflation played a role in wages, meaning that the price of everything went up. But then the federal surveys come out and say, well, good news is the wages are keeping up too, but not really the case for a lot of people. And they don't really have a lot to sacrifice to begin with. However, there may be more demand in the places they're working. And people are like, you know what? I get paid for 40 hours. You're not paying me overtime because you're calling me salaried. I think those days might be starting to become over where you just overwork someone, expect them to work for little pay. Do you think this is kind of one of the steps in the natural progression in a workplace where the worker starts to, I guess shift the balances a little bit more in their favor where they can actually bring up those wages some?
Yeah, without question. And that's been happening. It really started out of the pandemic, and people were able to work from home. I mean, working remotely is one of the big levers that companies can pull in order to give people more control over how they work. Well, that doesn't work for everybody. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't have the ability to work from home, and so you can't necessarily use that as a way to make their lives better. But you've got to be able to find ways to recognize that there's more anxiety, typically, at least according to surveys. At least people are willing to talk about their anxiety more. That people feel overwhelmed. They're worried about their mental health. They want to take care of their kids. All of these things are there's nothing wrong with them, but employers have to be able to respond, and how you hire people, how you keep them motivated, how you keep them productive is different than it was 5 years ago. And being able to give some flexibility, being able to recognize that, hey, these are real life situations. And I, as an employer, have a way to be able to assist. I mean, do something about that. There's lots of ways to help with this, but you've got to recognize that it's happening because it is. And, the labor environment's been very tough for companies for the last couple of years, and it's not getting any easier unless you're being proactive about this stuff and being able to tell somebody during an interview that, hey, we've got these benefits to make sure that you're being taken care of. And I'm not talking about ping pong table in the office. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that will change people's lives and bring them a lot more personal satisfaction at home.
Yeah, I'm seeing some different trends in workplaces, and joining us here is Joel Patterson. He's a workplace expert. He's the head of the Vested Group, a firm that is always on the best places to work. And I saw someone mention this online. They say this is kind of this is a test to tell if you work in a good place or not, or at least a place that's friendly to employees. And I wanted to get your opinion on this. They said if you request a day off and they fight you on it, or if they say, we can find someone, don't worry about it, that's one of the big reasons, or that's one of the big tests you can find out if you work in a good place or not. Does that seem about right?
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, now you got to be reasonable, right? You can't go in that morning and say, hey, I need the day off. But as long as you recognize that the company has a job to do as well, and you're there to support that, and you give them the proper notice, then absolutely. I think that people need to be able to start taking a little bit more care for their own career. Self-advocacy is something that is very difficult for most people, especially people coming out of college, to learn. And if you learn that, hey, I need to step up for myself, that's actually good for your employer. As long as you're doing it in a way that makes sense and it's respectful, then by all means, you need to be able to recognize that, hey, I need a little time. I need to take care of something, because ultimately what that does is it does allow you to do a better job at work. If you don't have to worry about those things that are going on at home, you feel rested, you feel like you're supported at work, you can lean into that, and it'll make your job satisfaction even better. Now, it doesn't mean jobs are, nobody's got a job that's perfect, right? Everybody's got things that they have to do that you don't necessarily love to do and doesn't bring you any energy, but that's just normal life. And I think people recognizing that they can have a little bit more influence on how they're paid, what their description of their job is, will bring them to a place that allows them to be happier and more content overall.
Well, let me give you another thing that happened over the summer. It's doing the show here in South Carolina, but I live in Detroit, and we just went through the big auto strike. And, of course, the auto workers went out on the picket lines. They were out there for a long time. It cost the big three a lot of money, but eventually they came back to the table, found the deal. They're back at work. They have, some of the things that they negotiated that they were happy with. A lot of the newer, younger employees found that to be true, but we found that the United Auto Workers now are going to other auto companies and saying, we want you to join the UAW. We can make the same deal for you. But naturally speaking, some of the big car companies looked at what was being demanded, and they just automatically gave that to their employees to try to say, we don't need a union here because we can give you the same benefits, and they don't have to take some money out of your paycheck. So I bring that up as an example. What happens when other companies start offering benefits? Let's say then all of a sudden, do other companies feel pressure to start offering other benefits? Or do you find that the opposite happens, where maybe good people are just maybe gravitate towards companies with good benefits, and those are the ones that are going to succeed? Or do you think that naturally when you start to see more things happening, it's a chain reaction among companies and things start to get better across the board?
I think people just consistently steal from each other, right? I mean, no matter what it is, whether if they see somebody is having some success with a benefit, then they're gonna get on board. These days, if you are complacent about how you recruit and retain people, you're already behind. Like we were talking about before, the labor, the environment has been really challenging over the last few years. It's sliding back. It's not as bad now as it was a year ago. But you've got to be able to stay ahead of the game, because the people that are creative and coming up with those benefits that are working, they're advertising them. They're definitely going to be out there letting other people know, and you've got to be able to get on board and stay current. Now, it's common. People think that, well, nobody just stays at a company for 30 years anymore, but there are people that still do that, and those kind of people, they don't like change. They probably wouldn't necessarily be moved to change a job because of a benefit, but they're in the minority these days. I mean, I don't go into a lot of companies these days that have really tenured employees. They're looking for the best, the brightest, the people that they've got good skills, that maybe bring something unique to the table. All of those things come into account, and you've got to pay them a good salary, right? I mean, people like to act like that money isn't a good thing to talk about, but you got to do the minimum around making sure that you're paying an equitable salary. But when you've got an extra benefit, whether it's working from home or whatever it might be, that's going to, all things being equal, it's going to put you ahead, and it's going to put you farther along in competing with the people in your industry. So it takes work. You got to recognize that the change is coming, and you've got to get on board, but you can't just sit back and assume it's going to happen and everybody's just going to hang out and be happy.
Joel Patterson with the Vested Group. If people wanted to look you up online, where can they go?
Thevested.com. We're a technology consulting firm that focuses on NetSuite, but we really focus on our people, right? It's all about culture, and that really makes a difference in your business long term. So I encourage everybody to just be intentional about how you spend time with your employees. Take 1 minute and just say, hey, how you doing today? And I think you'll be surprised at the results.
Joel Patterson, workplace expert, the Vested Group. You can look up online. Thank you for joining us in South Carolina. Appreciate it, Joel.
Thank you.